To set the stage, we are here today with Jason Feifer. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Yelp small business expert, Emily Washcovick. I educate business owners on the free tools available to make the most of Yelp. And I do a lot of context setting for the world of online reviews, how to engage digitally as a business. And in that journey, I've been fortunate enough to be connected to Jason. Fun little story. Before the pandemic, Jason locked himself out of his office at Entrepreneur and got on Yelp and was looking for someone to let him in. And he found Jay the locksmith, who is a longtime friend of mine. He's been in business for years, and he attributes a lot of his success to getting on Yelp over a decade ago, before it was really a home pro site, and using his personality to build that incredible reputation he has. So him and Jason got to talking, which doesn't surprise me knowing Jay at all. And next thing you know, Jay was on one of Jason's podcasts. I'll have Jason plug both of his shows for you today so you can get more insights there. But they got to talking, and Jason had this idea that maybe Yelp had a unique position where we could educate business owners through the lens of our consumers, our users, and our reviewers. And so we kicked that idea around. It was then the beginning of the pandemic. So it was normal for Jason and I to not meet in person, but just be on Zoom. And then next thing you know, we had my podcast, Behind the Review, which is now over 2 years old. We just broke 500,000 downloads last month. So we're growing and excited to keep telling those stories. But honestly, the greatest thing for me out of that has just been being able to get to know Jason and learn more from him. We were laughing before we hopped on. I think I've only probably spent maybe 2 total hours face to face with Jason, but I follow him everywhere, and I need all of you to do that too. You got to sign up for his newsletter. You need to be following him on social media, on LinkedIn, because he is so great at sharing the stories of people he talks to, which is his bread and butter, but also just sharing his own experiences. And that is what got me obsessed with this book that we're going to dig into today. When Jason told me he was launching a book and what it was all about, I went to Yelp right away and asked if we could buy copies. We have 500 copies to give away. Allie's going to drop that link again for you to get your copy. And we set up this event and we said, you know what, let's just hop on and talk about this book. And that's what we're going to do for the next hour. A little context setting for you all. Jason goes into history in this book. He shares his own personal experiences. And the whole time he's talking about change and what innately connects all of us when we experience change, no matter if we're a founder, an entrepreneur, a billionaire, someone working for a company. Change affects us all in these same 4 phases. Jason, why don't you give me the introduction of who you are for those people who don't know your face, and then dig into the basis of this book, those 4 phases of change that you really outline and give people as a way to navigate forward themselves effectively.
Awesome. Well, Emily, that was like the greatest intro of all time. I really, really appreciate it. I'm so touched, and it's been so great to connect with you personally and also with Yelp. And so welcome everybody. I'm really happy to be here. So what Emily's talking about here is the 4 phases of change, which is something that I recognized during the pandemic. We had this really interesting moment where everybody was going through the same change at the same time and then doing totally different things as a result. And I got really curious about why and how some people seem to be able to move quickly to reinvent themselves or their businesses, and other people were a lot slower and more protective of the past. And what I came to realize in talking to people, because as editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, I have access to everybody. It's an honor to be in this position, is that I realized that everybody's going through the same 4 phases of change. Everybody experiences change the same way. The real difference maker is just how fast do they move through them. So the 4 phases are panic, which I bet a lot of people are familiar with, adaptation, new normal, and then wouldn't go back. Wouldn't go back being that moment where we say, I have something so new and valuable that I wouldn't want to go back to a time before I had it. And that is available to everybody. Like, that is the thing that is at the end of the journey for everybody. But the challenge, I think, is that some people expect it and believe that it's there and move forward with the faith that the harder phases of change are purposeful, because they're really helping us recognize what that wouldn't go back moment is. And I think there are other people for whom those earlier phases are very difficult. And the reason is often because you're focusing so much on what you've lost that you're not spending any time trying to anticipate what you could gain. And as a result, move through it much slower, and the pain and the panic take much longer. And I think that we can do better. I think that each individual person can better move through any experience of change, whether that's big, like a pandemic, or small, like just something that's changing in your own business, and recognize that there's value on the other end of that. So why don't we spend our energy figuring out what that could look like and how to maximize it?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. And I'm going to use this time today to walk through the book and really dig in on some of the areas that I think speak the best to our entrepreneur audience. But at the end of the day, I mean, I knew 10 pages in that I'm going to read this book multiple times. I was underlining things. You can see I've got my sticky notes,
I love that.
and so I want you all to feel like even going through this process, it's going to be repetitive, right? Because we all know that humans don't love change. Like, we've been hearing that since we were kids, I think. But it's about remembering that every time you're going through it. And that's where I think the repetitive nature of understanding it really helps. Before we even dig into the first section, I want you to talk a little bit about the historical setting, because really for me, that did kind of take this whole experience to the next level, where you were able to take us back through hundreds, if not thousands of years of history at some points, to show those change increments in our lives as humans and how we pushed against them, but we always got to the never go back phase.
Right.
Can you just speak to a little bit why you use history to teach those lessons?
So, and I will, but before I do that, actually, I'm just going to take what you said before and advance it a little further, which is like, so everybody who's watching right now, I'm just going to assume that something about your business or your life has changed. And so this is something that we all need to navigate. But also, I think that what's really interesting for entrepreneurs is that entrepreneurs are also often introducing change to other people, right? Because either you have a new kind of service or product, and you're introducing that to the world, and you're trying to get people to understand it, or something has changed in your community or your business, and so you're trying to, maybe you also have to introduce new things to your employees. So there's a lot happening where you are both the responding to change, but you are also introducing change. And so it's helpful to understand how you navigate it, and then also how you can kind of help people through it. So I'll give one example of that, which is that one thing that I found as I've studied history, is so nice segue, is that people don't like new things. You know what they like? They like better versions of old things. And if we can really appreciate what that means, and I'll give you an example to do so, then I think we can really start to understand how best to connect with other people, whether those are our customers or our employees or anybody else, to help them get over the hump. So you asked about history. So here's the thing. I really love history because the story has an ending, which is to say that the decisions that we make today, right, the decisions that I'm making in my own business, that Emily, you're making in your own life, the decisions that the leadership at Yelp are making, we don't really know how those are going to play out. We have a guess, right? We're making educated decisions, but we don't really know how they play out. And therefore, it's hard to know exactly what the wisdom is of every decision. But if you go back 100-something years, you can see how decisions played out. And therefore, you can extract what I feel like are really valuable concrete lessons. So one of my favorite stories is it goes towards, I think, the greatest mistake that innovators often make is that they believe so deeply in the thing that they're building, and they're so familiar with it, as they should be, that they forget that other people don't understand it as well as they do. And as a result, the conversation can be completely disconnected, where you're telling people about this great solution that you have, and they may not understand it, or they may not understand the problem that you're targeting, and therefore it doesn't connect. And you can see this happening everywhere. I think that oftentimes when there's like backlashes to new technologies, that's in part because the innovators didn't really do a good job of introducing it and explaining the value of it. So you can see this play out in the history of the car. So when we tell the story of the car right now, what we do is we tell the story of Henry Ford. We say that, Henry Ford revolutionized manufacturing, and therefore he enabled the car to become mass adopted. But that skips over a really important part of the story. So let me tell you what history often forgets, or what the history books often forget. So first of all, when the car was introduced in the late 1800s, people didn't call it a car because that word wasn't really around. They called it a horseless carriage. And that's if they were being generous. If they were not, they would call it the devil wagon, because that's what people tended to call cars back then. And they hated these things, where they threw rocks at them. If a car drove down the street, people would be on the sidewalk and they would yell, "Get a horse!" at the car. And it was just like, what's going on? Well, the audio industry was trying to figure out like what's the disconnect here, and there's a whole bunch of, it's a complicated lot of different reasons, but one of the big ones that they zeroed in on was that they were talking about the car all wrong, because the advertisements of the time talked about the car as a replacement to the horse. So the ads would say, get rid of Dobbin, Dobbin being like a generic horse, the way that Spot is for a dog now, like get rid of Dobbin and get this car, which is so much better. And people found that offensive, and they should have found that offensive, because they had a horse. A horse is a member of their family. As far back as they knew, a horse was a part of the family. And now here come these people who might as well be like the 1800s version of Silicon Valley tech bros, right? And they're like, get rid of this thing, you're doing it all wrong. And people don't like that. So what the auto industry needed to do was to stop talking about the car as a replacement to the horse and start talking about the car as a better horse. Because remember, like I said, people don't like new things. What they like are better versions of old things. So the car industry started to talk about cars in terms of horses, popularizing terms like horsepower, naming cars after horses, which is something we still do today with a Bronco, for example. And they also did like weird things that we don't do today. Like they had like mechanical horse heads that they put on the front of the cars. And like that, we don't have that. But ultimately that helped get people over that hump. And now I see versions of that. I like to call that the bridge of familiarity, which is to say that you have to start not with what you have that's great for others, but start the other way around. What is your consumer familiar with? What's their level of comfort? Start with that and then build them towards you rather than the other way around. I see versions of this all the time. Just very briefly, when Nintendo released the Wii, and I think it was 2004, this was a revolutionary idea. I mean, now it's not as much because, this phone also has a million sensors in it. But back then, the idea of swinging a piece of hardware and you'd see somebody on a screen do the same thing, that was pretty revolutionary. And the greatest game that Nintendo had created in advance of the launch was called Wii Sports. Maybe you all remember Wii Sports. It was amazing. So you stand there and you swing your little controller, and the character on screen swings a tennis racket. Now, Nintendo planned to sell Wii Sports separate from the Wii. So you buy a Wii and then you buy Wii Sports. And they thought they would make a killing on this because, of course, Wii Sports was so good. It was such a good game. But this guy, Reggie Fils-Aimé, who was the president of Nintendo America at the time, had a different idea. He said, no, we actually have to forego the profits of Wii Sports and just bundle them together so that the Wii Sports game comes with the Wii. Why? Because the Wii Sports game is actually the greatest argument for why you should use the Wii. It instantly explains why this thing is valuable. And if you don't have that, then people are going to say, well, this is interesting technology, but I don't really know what to do with it. So you have to take the greatest example of what this is valuable for and then give it to people. The rest of his executive team did not really agree with this. And so it was a big battle inside of Nintendo. And they ultimately decided to split the baby, which is to say that in Japan and some Asian markets, they were separate. People bought the Wii and then they could buy Wii Sports if they wanted. But in the Americas and Europe, where Reggie oversaw, they bundled them together. And the results were that America and Europe led the world in growth and adoption and sales for We. And I think the answer is very clear, because what Reggie was doing is he was building a bridge of familiarity. He was recognizing where people are and how to bring them to Nintendo, rather than starting with Nintendo giving them something. That's how we have to do it. And that's why I love history, because you can see those play out.
Yeah, the Bridge of Familiarity is really a part of the book that I think you have to read a couple times, to be honest, because you understand it once it all clicks. Like even the electricity and lighting example, which we don't have to get into that. You guys should read that in the book. But that was an aha moment for me, where I could easily equate my own bridges of familiarity once I kind of got to that part. So I think the concept is good. Remember that when you're trying to get people to appreciate a new item, you have to present it in the fact of what they already love about something and the improvements on it. But I do think kind of getting through that exercise with yourself can be kind of hard. But if you think about it specific to an offering that you provide, you can really, it'll light up right away. Fun little Wii bowling or Wii side tangent. If any of you have old parents or grandparents or anyone who are in like facilities, if they don't already play Wii bowling, you should recommend it. It's one of my grandma's favorite things. She bowls twice a week. She loves it. Okay, I want to dig into the fact that this book is written for anyone. However, you identify something that you've noticed that's different about entrepreneurs that can almost help them in this process of change by being more proactive and almost being the ones to create the change as opposed to always be taking it on. Two things you said, and of course I'm like, yes, this is so true, but I want everyone on the line to hear it. Entrepreneurs are adaptable in a way that you didn't think was possible. I think you're right. The pandemic like blew that wide open. But the reason is because of this intuitive understanding of what's worth protecting and almost like what their why is. Can you dig in a little bit into how you see that play out so that these entrepreneurs can maybe try to be in that mindset more often, appreciate that part of their natural ability when it comes to their business?
Yeah, so I think that the mistake that we often make is that we identify too closely with the output of our work. So, so if you have a business, or if you don't, if you just you work a job somewhere, like you are often going to think of your identity in terms of the tasks that you do, or the services or the products that you make or provide, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the challenge is that when we identify too closely with the things that are changeable, because all of those things are changeable, well, then as soon as they do change, we feel totally disoriented and we feel like we have nothing left. And so I think that what we need to do is push ourselves to identify something a little deeper. I see that it's something that entrepreneurs, a lot of them naturally do, which is to say that they've created something of a mission statement for themselves or for their businesses that don't actually depend upon the individual things that their businesses do, right? So I remember when I interviewed, actually, here's an interesting example that I think is in the book. Was so Stacey London is a friend of mine, and Stacey London you might know from What Not to Wear, and she had a long career in television with this show on TLC, and then as she got older, she stayed in television for a while, but it was getting harder and harder, and as she reached 50, she wanted to make a show about helping people through this kind of next phase of life. And because this is what she does, right? What she does on television is she helps people through challenging times and issues of self-esteem. And that's what her fashion work has been about. And television executives were not interested in this at all. And meanwhile, she had started to be a beta tester for a company called State of Menopause, which is they make products that help women through menopausal symptoms. And so she was very enthusiastic about this company. But to her great surprise, the company one day came to her and said, we're actually, the parent company is not interested in supporting this brand anymore. Would you like to buy it and run it? And at first, Stacey said, no, I'm not interested in that, right? Like, because that's not what I do. Like, I'm a TV person. And then she stepped back and she thought, well, wait a second. I always tell people that you have to let go of who you were to become who you are. And I maybe need to do that myself. And maybe there is something about what I have done in my life that actually can set me up for success in this, what feels like totally different venture. And she came to realize that the thing that is so deep inside of her is not about fashion. It's not about television. It was really about helping people build self-confidence. And that is something that is very much a core of the kind of person that she would need to be to run a company called State of Menopause. And that gave her the feeling like maybe this is possible, because my core, my mission in life is not help people with fashion. It's help people with their self-esteem. And that's totally different. I think we often, when we find that thing for ourselves, and I will tell you that for me, I found that it's a simple sentence that I like to use, and I would push everybody to identify something that, I like to call it the thing that does not change in times of change. What's the thing about you that does not change in times of change? For me, a guy who came up in media, who writes books, magazine articles, all sorts of stuff, I came up with this. I tell stories in my own voice. 7 words. I tell stories in my own voice. Why is that a powerful sentence for me? Because it liberates me from any specific change. So if today Entrepreneur Magazine decides to fire me, I hope not, but if they do, it doesn't take away my ability to tell stories in my own voice, because I'm not saying I'm a magazine writer, I'm saying I'm a storyteller. And that's why I think the deeper we can move into our core and identify the thing about us that does not change in times of change, what we really do is recognize the value that we have that's transferable out of any situation that we're in and into something else. I would argue that, we talked about Jay, the locksmith, at the very beginning of this. I would argue that if for some reason or another that locks disappeared in the world, or whatever, like there's no need for locks anymore, and therefore no need for a locksmith, that Jay, his skill set is not locksmithing. Right? Like his skill set is really customer service. That's what he is. He's really, really good at understanding what people need and how to serve them. Anybody can learn how to be a locksmith, but I don't think that everybody can learn how to connect with humans like that. And I think that what he needs to do, if he's not doing this already, is to recognize and identify himself not as a locksmith, but as somebody who helps people through difficult situations or helps people in stressful moments, because that's something that people are always going to need. And if you think of that as your identity, then it doesn't really matter what happens outside of it. You can always find a way to fulfill that.
Yeah, that's spot on. And I turned myself to the page of when you go through the action of like figuring this out for yourself, because I think you're right. A mission statement for your business gets you a vast majority of the way there. But also you might be listening to this and think, oh God, if my service or my good was eliminated, I don't know what that would be.
Mm-hmm.
So the way you break this down is almost like talking to someone as if they're at a dinner party and they're
Yes.
going to introduce themselves, right? Let's just go through this for a minute and kind of have people think about this. So layer 1, you call it the surface.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that someone comes up to you at a dinner party and says, so what do you do? Just write down for yourself what you think that answer is in a simple sentence. Do you want to explain how people normally do the first level, Jason?
Yeah,
and then
sure.
we'll go to the mantle.
Yep, absolutely. So so what we're going to do here is we're going to run a scenario 3 times. And the reason that we're doing it is because we want to do is identify and then take away the ways in which we usually identify ourselves. So like, what are the things that we just kind of automatically do or we rest upon because we want to get deeper inside of ourselves. So when I say somebody comes up to you at a party and they ask what you do, what's the first thing that you're going to say? I know what it is. What you're going to do is you're going to talk about your tasks, either, you know, what you do at work or the way that you do it or the role that you occupy. The product of your work is what you're going to do. So, you know, the example that I use in the book is when my first job was a newspaper reporter. And so I would have said, well, I go, what do I do? I'm a newspaper reporter, which means that I go out and I interview people, I find the news and I put it in the newspaper. So great. So now let's move on to the next part of the scenario, which is someone comes up to you at a party, same thing. Someone comes up to you at a party and they ask what you do. But now can't talk about your tasks. So anything that you thought about the first time is off the table. So now what are you going to do? Well, now I would say you talk about your skills, which is to say, you know, the thing that is deeper underneath the tasks, the things that are enabling you to do the tasks. Actually, let me stop here just so we can play it out. So, so Emily, like, you know, you've been exposed to this whole thing, so maybe you've already thought a level deeper, but take us back to the beginning, how you might have answered this fresh. So if somebody came up to you and asks, you know, what you do, the level 1 here, tasks, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, had I not known we were going to go down a level, I think I would start by saying I work at Yelp and educate business owners on Yelp's free tools.
Right.
I would keep it probably pretty simple at that level. But then when you get to the next level, you're right. I would have to think a little bit harder about that. And I think I would shift into more of the connection making. So I connect with business owners and entrepreneurs to help guide them through, I don't know how I would exactly describe it, but like better engage with the digital version of their business, something like that. When we get to the core, I have to tell you, I was doing this a little bit as I was going through.
Well, wait.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
We haven't brought everybody there yet. So let's do that. So, okay, so that's good, right? So what you did is when you went from step 1 to step 2, you removed Yelp. So, you know, now you're recognizing yourself as someone who's just really good at working with people in business and helping them recognize opportunity, which is fantastic, right? And you could frame that, you still kind of phrased it as a task, but you could easily reframe that as a skill, right? Which is to say, I'm really good at identifying people's problems in business and then helping them recognize like the tools that are available to them or something like that, right? So, okay, so now we're going to do it one more time, which is to say someone comes up to you at a party and they ask what you do. Now we can't talk about our tasks and we can't talk about our skills. So all that is off the table. Now what do we talk about? Now we're really down to talking about our core. Our why, as some people call it, which is to say the thing that is so deep inside of us that it drove us to develop the skills that enable us to do the tasks. And that's the thing that we need to be able to say in a really short, simple sentence, something that is, like I said, the thing about us that does not change in times of change. So I've given you mine. I tell stories in my own voice. You've had a little bit of time to think about it. For you, where did you go?
Yeah, you know, it's so hard for me to be punchy like that. It's not, I hate to narrow myself so tight, you know, but
it's fine.
You're totally right. You got to have it in a succinct way. I would probably say something to the effect of, I highlight great business successes and failures to elevate others, something like that.
I think that's great. And you can, you know, like, look, this is not something that I think anybody should be able to, nobody should be able to hear us talk about this or just read it in the book and instantly know the answer for themselves, right?
Takes some time.
It takes some time. You marinate on it. I mean, I can't remember how long it took me to have, I tell stories in my own voice, but I think I had a multiple variations of it before I came to the one that I really like. And you know, and you'll find as you start to think about what you're really good at and what really drives you, you'll start to refine that down. Now, I really like that in each one of those things, you're really telling yourself something about you, which is that you love being in a place where you're supporting others and helping other people grow, right? Like that's a wonderful thing. And if you want, you could probably even start from the position of I help others thrive, like that simple, right? And then refine it from there. But you don't want to refine it too much because you don't. Like again, just to use the example of that you had wisely, and for the purposes of the example or the exercise, you have to like removed Yelp from, right? So Yelp was in your first one, right? But that makes a lot of sense because although you are thriving at Yelp and you're a great asset to Yelp, right? Like we don't know what happens in 20 years, right? So Yelp could be a totally different thing. You could be a totally different person. So we don't want to anchor ourselves to anything that is easily changeable. I will always be a storyteller. It is my core skill set. You will always be someone who thrives off of helping others thrive. There's nothing that can change in the world that's going to stop that from happening. So that is now your engine, and that's great. So that means that if tomorrow there's some massive change in your life and you need to figure out something to do, the starting point for you is I'm really great at helping people thrive. What is another way in which I could do that? Now that gives you endless possibilities. Whereas if you would define yourself solely by, I occupy this role at this company, that's very narrowing. And then the second that gets disrupted, you don't know what to do.
Well, and for our business owners, I mean, I would really challenge you to remove the core part of what it is you think you do if that's not the through line for any change. And I'll just give a quick story. There's this business, they're now called Tres Lecheria. I had them on my podcast a couple months ago, but they started as a bakery. Their whole shtick years ago was Cubes Baking Company. So they made all the baked goods that you probably are used to, but in a cube shape, right? Most baked goods are circular. So that was their whole thing. They were a cubed baking company. Well, when the pandemic came, I mean, the volume, of course, was just instantly like shrunk down.
Yeah.
Their brick and mortar wasn't running the way it used to. And if they had stuck to, we make baked goods in cube shapes, that would have been a very like, now what do we do question. But instead, they know that they like to make stuff that tastes good for people. Like for them, it is making something. And when they looked at the numbers of what was happening in the pandemic, it was very obvious that one of their items, Tres Leches cake, was pretty much like what they were selling the most of and what everyone was reviewing. So that was the thing people were really connecting to. And they completely shifted their business. They only started serving Tres Leches cake. Now, sure, they made it interesting by having tons of fun flavors you might never have tried Tres Leches in. But now their growth plan is not to have tons of brick and mortars that sell Tres Leches cake. They're in tons and tons of grocery stores as single serve items. And so no matter what your business is, the service you provide or the good that you offer, I would still encourage you to go through this process of the surface, the mantle, and the core, and get yourself out of the actual thing that you sell and think about what's core to you so that you can duck and jive and change and stay true to yourself without staying true to the service offering or the product. I hope that resonates for the people listening.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Because look, this is not an idle exercise. This is really about figuring out how you can grow and thrive. Because even if you're not feeling like so kind of big level of disruption, there's still always the question of how can you better or best serve people? What else can you do to really maximize that? And so similar with the example that you just gave. I mean, a story I always think about is I was talking to Greg Fleischman, the CEO of Food Stirs, which is a baking, you go to Whole Foods and you can find their products or the baking mixes and ready to eat goods or whatever. And anyway, they were going through like a big change a number of years ago, and it was altering the kind of products that they were selling. And I was talking to Greg about it, and I said, was it a bummer to have to kind of navigate this and put some plans on hold? And he said, no, it wasn't, because our mission is to bring joy to people through sweet baked goods. And he just had that line Our mission is to bring joy to people through sweet baked. And if that's your mission, then it doesn't really matter what kind of products you produce. It doesn't matter if it's baking mixes today or boxes of donuts tomorrow. The thing is to just bring joy to people and make it an upgraded product. So that's what we need to be thinking about, because everybody who's watching this does some kind of work and does it well and has customers who appreciate it. But that doesn't mean that it's the only thing that you can do for people. There are always opportunities to grow, to refine, and that's going to start by understanding the core value that you actually have.
Yeah, I think that's great. There's two different directions I want to go in, which is going to make this next question hard, but
Sure.
let's actually, you know what? I want to do a quick overview of the edible arrangement story, because I think that's such a great example of how we can get stuck in the panic phase. We can focus on all the wrong things and we can waste a lot of time and energy. Do you want to kind of like run through the high level of what happened? The punchline is so good when he like just gets totally destroyed. So go ahead.
Sure. Oh yeah, that's great. That's funny. You know, people ask me for like, you know, sort of about different things in the book, but nobody has yet asked me to talk about that particular example. So, you know, everybody knows the brand Edible Arrangements, the popular franchise, been around for a long time, and the founder's name I think is Tariq, and so you know, Tariq started this company, and I can't remember what it was originally called when it was like a little flower shop or something, but it eventually evolved into Edible Arrangements where people can buy, you know, bouquets made of fruit, and then he evolved the brand further and got rid of the arrangements parts, and then the company is just called Edible, and that was fine, and it still, you know, is. But a number of years ago, when California was the first state to pass a marijuana decriminalization law, in the bill, it talked about edibles, which of course, for anybody in the world, except for Tariq, because he was like the only person not aware of this, and for everybody in the world, like the word edibles means some, you know, kind of food with pot in it, right? And so Tariq saw this, and he was alarmed, because he did not want his brand to be associated with, you know, what he saw as, you know, this illegal drug and how terrible this is. And he thought it was a real, you know, like a brand reputation issue. And so his first instinct was try to stop it. And he hired, you know, he got his lawyer, and they came up with a whole plan, and they're going around and they're like lobbying different states to stop using the word edible to refer to cannabis, which is, of course, I mean, it's like, you know, you might as well try to fight a mountain. Like, it's not going to work, you know? And eventually, somebody said to him, I don't remember, I don't have it exactly. If you have it in front of me, you can quote it, but it was, somebody said to him something like, hey, look, you know, if there's like a big wave coming at you, then you really need to take a look at like, what is it? Because it's really one of two things. It either is a dangerous, like hazardous, insane wave that's going to crash upon you, and you need to get out of the way, or it's actually a really great surfing wave, and you should grab a surfboard and ride it. And so Tariq decided to step back from this completely unwinnable fight and start doing some education for himself about what edibles were and the whole cannabis thing. And he found that, you know, it wasn't just a thing for stoners. There's all sorts of kind of medical reasons people use it, but also he discovered CBD, which for anybody who knows is, you know, CBD is not, it doesn't impact you. It doesn't make you high, but it's got these, you know, extract. I'm not an expert in CBD, but it's sort of this extract from cannabis, and people attribute all sorts of great health benefits to it. And he thought, you know, maybe I should get into this business, because here we are, we're actually kind of weirdly well positioned for it because we have the association with the name. And so they opened up their very first CBD store, as the Edible Arrangements company made a CBD store in Connecticut. And I don't know what has happened since then. I don't think that it's really taken over the world, but what it did do was it gave him a way to engage with and explore this space, and also to recognize that there was opportunity here, and that what he should not be doing is spending all this energy trying to stop something. And the reason I put this story in the book is because I think that we often all end up doing some versions of this terrible thing, where we spend so much energy trying to stop something that is unstoppable, that we are not actually spending enough energy trying to figure out how we can make use of it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I was reading that story and I'm like, oh, this poor guy. I know how this is gonna go. And then the wasted time is like when you can see it happen to someone else in an example like that, that's totally unwinnable. I think you ask yourself some better questions like, is my fight a worthy fight? We had a
Right.
really nice question come in from Allison about, what to do when you're trying to stick this core version of yourself. She says, I love the
Yeah.
concept, trying to remember you're not your product and that your skills are transferable. But how do you define and make sure that you're keeping your core consistent throughout iterations? Good question.
Mm, that is a really good question. Well, look, I mean, I think that for the beginning of trying to figure this out for yourself, consider this consider this I'm trying to think of like the
A
language
vacuum.
for like a yeah like a vacuum sealed container, right? Like it's like an air gapped computer, right? It's not touching anything else. And spend some time with it, because ultimately the answer to this is not supposed to then radically alter your business, but rather it's supposed to guide you through evolutions that are going forward. So you should spend some time experimenting with it. Talk about it. I will tell you that when I first came up with this exercise, I started doing it at like dinner with friends, and it was people really loved it, and it started great conversations about what was deep down inside of people, and then they would ponder it afterwards, and I think that you should do that too. And it's fine, it's fine for that thing to change, because I think that even when it does change, what it's really going to be doing is giving you maybe a updated or more refined vision of yourself, but it's not going to radically change the way that you actually I was telling somebody about this not long ago, and I explained the I tell stories in my own voice thing, and they said that's interesting, but you're not really just a storyteller anymore. Like, that might be a version of you from when you really thought of yourself purely as a media person. But at this point, you're actively helping people build things or recognize something about themselves. And I realized, that's true. And maybe I tell stories in my own voice actually needs to be changed a little bit, because maybe what it really is I tell stories that help others or something like that, right? Because that's now the service that I'm putting that storytelling towards, which wasn't always the case. So, but you see, even if I make that change, it doesn't really alter everything that I do. What it does is it gives me more clarity of purpose, and there's a lot of value to that. So I'd say spend some time with it. You don't have to unleash it into the world immediately, and you never actually have to tell somebody about it. It's not like if somebody comes up to me at a party, I don't actually say, oh, I tell stories in my own voice, right? Like that would be obnoxious. I don't do that. But that's what I tell myself. Like that's just a way to understand myself. And that's why it's useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I knew this was going to happen where I would look at the clock and I'd be like, oh my gosh. So I'm going to move us forward to a future
Sure.
phase here. I want to talk about the new normal phase because I
Uh-huh.
think the way you start that section is so important. And
Mm,
you say, after being disrupted by change, we'll be desperate for something familiar and predictable. And I read that and I was like, but we're going to see how great this change is. Won't that change us? But we've been going through this process our whole lives, right?
right.
Of change is happening and we still, react the same way. So can you talk a little bit about how you, as someone that works on and studies change, has tried to apply this to yourself? Like, what are maybe some red flags you notice when you get to that normal phase, or something that happens that's like, oh, I've closed myself down again. How do I open myself up to the positivity of these things?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it typically what I do is I catch myself saying no to something. Is often the way that it begins. Very simply, or like a very small but simple example, is okay. So I give this keynote. I travel a lot, and I talk to corporations and audiences, and I give this keynote, and it's versions of the same thing that I've created, and it didn't come out of nowhere. It evolved over time. but I've been giving this same keynote for some time now, and I'm very comfortable with it. And I love that I don't have to prep for it. I don't have to think about it. I just show up and I do it, and I can modify it on the fly because I know where everything is. But I was in Toronto a couple of weeks ago, and my speaking agency is in Toronto, and so a bunch of the folks in the agency came out to see me, and afterwards, I had told the story in the Q&A, which I often tell in the Q&A, which is actually the car story that I told you at the very beginning. It often comes up in Q&A, and when we got back to the office, one of my the guy that I work with over at the agency had asked me to tell everybody else who wasn't at the talk, like they assembled a lot of people, the car story. And afterwards, he was like, that's such a valuable story. Like, it really connects. And I've heard people react really well to that in the Bridge of Familiarity. And I thought, maybe I should put that in the talk instead of always saving it for. Then I was like, too much work. Like, the talk's good. The talk's good how it is. But then it kept nagging at me. Maybe I should put it in the talk. And I thought, well, what does it mean to put it in the talk? It means making some sacrifices, saying, here's something that I've said on stage for the last year and a half. I'm very comfortable with it. I think maybe I'll retire it and never say it again. And I didn't like that. That was deeply uncomfortable. And I got to spend all this time figuring it out. And there are going to be these times where now I'm on stage, I'm like working through some new material, and it's going to be, and but when I catch myself doing that, that's when I now have to tell myself, that's a reason to do it. Like, that's the reason to do it, because I'm pushing back against it, but also because I keep having to wrestle with it. That means that there's good logic to it, that it's probably worth doing, that I cannot hit pause on my growth here because I can't be doing this talk for the next 20 years. It's going to have to evolve. It might as well evolve right now. I might as well do something new right now. So that's what I did. I actually literally yesterday spent about an hour and a half, like reworking the deck and built in all this new material. And now I'm going to try it out for the first time this week. Actually, we'll see how it goes. But there it is. The starting point has to be, you said no to some change, and then consider why you did it, because the answer might be just because you got comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a call out for everyone, we're going to take live questions if you have them. So pop them in. I know sometimes just watching Jason, it's like, just let him talk till the end. But if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in Q&A. My colleague will get them over to us. I think a lot of times when businesses get to that stage, it's a really good opportunity to be talking to the other people in the business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And saying, okay, we're in this new normal. We've gone through some really hard adaptations here. What's working? What's not? Because it's not like the phases of change are like, you're going to go all the way to the end and there's no evolution throughout, right? When you're in that new normal phase and you do feel yourself kind of pushing back or whatever, that's when I think it can be so valuable to pull people in, hear what your team thinks, hear what your colleagues are experiencing. I want to talk a little bit about the wouldn't go back stage from the perspective of when it's not quite obvious, like things are working, but you don't quite yet know you're there.
Mm-hmm.
What's that little like hump you think, or how can business owners try to be on the lookout when they're navigating change for like the feeling of we got to a place where it's better? Like, how do we look for that and make sure we're appreciating that part of the process when we get there?
I think we need to always be evaluating the value of the things that we're doing. It's worth, I have this page. You had actually sent me a photo of this page yesterday, which was, I have a whole page that just says, what is it for? There it is, or what is this for? Yeah. And there it is. And the reason I really emphasize that question is because it is a really simple way to try to understand the purpose of everything that we're either doing or making or committing our time to. And what's so interesting about the question is that the answer will change. So what is this for? If you're working on a project, what is this for could go from, what is this for? This is for teaching me how to do something, to this is helping me make more money, to this is opening additional opportunities. I think as long as you know what the answer is to that question, you can be tracking its value to you, and also tracking maybe when it's less valuable. So is there something that you're doing in your business where if you ask what is it for, the answer is just not that clear. I mean, I'll give you an example. I remember talking to a guy who did secondhand watch sales. So he would buy these antique watches off of people, and then he would repair them and then sell them. And most of his business was, and I'm not a watch expert, so I'm a little out of my depth here, but most of his business was within a particular range of the kind of easy to repair watches. But he would take these like very old, complicated watches that would take a lot of time and resources to repair, and then didn't sell for significantly more money. And so, at some point, he brought on a new COO who had forced him to go through every part of the business and basically evaluate it. And when they got to that part, just basically asking, what is it for? What is it for that we're taking these, like, what's the answer to that question? The answer is, well, it makes a couple people happy. And so that's nice. And it's cool to work on these things but is it really helping the business? No, it's actually sucking resources away from the business, because you could take the energy that you're putting on these small number of watches and put it towards many more watches that are much easier to work on. So maybe the best thing to do here is actually say, you know what, I'm sorry, we don't service those kinds of watches anymore, because what is it for? Not enough is the answer. And so the more that we ask that kind of question, we can recognize where we're thriving and where we actually need to refine.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, again, I think it's such a lonely place at the top, right? A lot of entrepreneurs feel like it's just me, or even founders, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have this entire team of people under them, and they still feel like it's just them. And so that's why it starts with asking yourself these questions, right?
Yeah.
It starts with reading a book like this, jotting things down for yourself, but then getting the dialogue going in your business. And maybe that's with your customers too,
Mm-hmm.
right? Using that as insights and data. Something that I think we should probably end on is just this whole idea of failure as data. And through the entire process of change, there's going to be failures the whole time. We have many failures all the time that we can learn little things from. And as a business owner, I think we need to be open to hearing that stuff, but it's really, really, really hard when it feels like failure.
Yeah.
So can you maybe just give a little bit of advice on that edge of as we're going through this entire change process and we feel like things are breaking down, how can that still be a benefit to us?
So, this is what you make of it. Let's be clear, right? Because when things don't work, or they're not working as well as they used to, or they stop working, whatever, that can be very alarming. It is not fun. I'm not here to tell you that it's going to be easy, but my internet is doing something funny, but as long as you can hear me, then I'll keep going. Yes. Okay, good. Suddenly everything is getting garbled, but we're going to keep going. Perfect that it started doing this as I'm talking about things not working. So look, the thing is that when something does not work, it is information, right? It may just feel like failure. It may feel like an absence of information, but it actually is information, because what it's doing is it's showing you what change has happened, what people wanted that they don't want anymore, what used to work that doesn't work anymore. All of these things are actually incredibly valuable insights, because they can drive you. Think about it like this. If you are doing something that no longer works, you're on the front line of seeing something that other people don't. You are actually ahead. You have more information than other people, because if it's not working for you, it's not working for others too. But now you know something that they don't, because you are there and you can utilize that. So, but I think the way in which we need to operate is to be aware of that and open to that, because that then frees us up to try to figure out what are we learning as a result, and where can we take that data and apply it. A story that is often told, not in my book actually, but I had heard it recently, and so it's top of mind as I'm talking about this right now, which was Stuart Butterfield, who had made a video game that was not successful. Right? He raised a bunch of money for this video game, and yet he just was not growing this thing at a rate in which it was going to be sustainable. So he decides to shut it down. And when he shuts it down, he returns his investors' money. He starts to think about, hey, there's this internal communication system that I built, or that we built inside of this video game, and people really like that. I wonder if that could be its own product. So he spins that out as its own product, and it becomes Slack. And Slack, of course, is something that probably everybody on this call is using, or at least has encountered. That was Stuart recognizing that that failure can be data, that he's doing something and it's not working, but that's not the end of the story. That's actually information that he can use. And over again, what you will find, what you've probably experienced in your own lives and businesses, is that oftentimes the greatest things that we create are really going to come out of the wreckage of the previous things that we created. And so let's be open to that and aware of that. Again, it's not a formula. It's not something that I can put together in a spreadsheet for you, but I'm telling you that if you think about it that way, then you will find new opportunities in the things that don't feel like they're working.
Yeah, you're still frozen for me, but I think we can do these final minutes just on audio. I just had my colleague Allie drop that link again for your book.
Great.
Oh, now you're back.
Oh, good. All right.
Yep, you're good. So everyone, if you haven't filled your info out yet in that link, please open it before we end the webinar so that you can type your information in and we can send you that free copy. I'm also having Allie drop Jason's website. It's super easy to remember, jasonfeifer.com. You can see all of his work there. You can subscribe to his newsletter there. In this last minute, I want to end on a Chip Gaines quote, and I also want people to go listen to that episode because it's such a powerful episode. But something that he talks about, I think, is so relatable to entrepreneurs. He says, my life's most complicated struggle is that if I don't sweat, if I don't feel physically exhausted, I feel like I haven't worked hard enough. And for him, it was a physical labor type of thing. Like that was where he came from. And now he's in more of a, less physically demanding job.
Right. This being just for Chip Gaines of Chip and Joanna Gaines of Fixer Upper and Magnolia, for those who, yeah.
Thank you. I should have given some more context on him. But I think every single entrepreneur that I've ever talked to feels like they have to burn the candle at both ends and be doing a million things all the time. And you and I have a pretty similar perspective on that and the need to recharge, but you kind of got there through the pandemic. I mean, you still push yourself to insane extremes, but could you leave this audience with a little bit of advice on how sometimes turning down the dial on your output doesn't mean you're not doing as well. It just means you're focusing your energy and time better.
Yeah, that's a really, really great place to end. And as I do it, I'm trying to find this quote that I really like that wasn't in the book, but so here it is. So Shonda Rhimes, obviously very successful TV producer. She had told Fast Company this, and a friend of mine had found it and put it in his newsletter, which was, I'm just going to read this thing that she had said. She said, my first year doing Grey's Anatomy, I would be at work at 10, 11 at night. And one of the executive producers, James Perriott, would go home at 6:30 or 7. And I would look at him with such rage. And he'd say, Shonda, this work will always be there tomorrow. Now, Shonda says, now I understand. You're never going to cut down the mountain to make it flat. It's always going to be a mountain. I try to focus on climbing this piece of the mountain and then thinking about climbing the rest of it later. I really love that. And I try to think about that when it is 11 p.m. and I have given my entire day to, to like completing tasks, and I still have 450 unread emails. And it's like, I can't cut down the mountain. What am I going to do? Even if I gave myself another 3 hours and I went to bed at 2 a.m, I still wouldn't have cut down the mountain. I'll still have a bazillion emails waiting for me. So let's understand that not everything can be done every day. And that instead, what we really need to do is preserve ourselves for long enough that we have enough of ourselves left for every day. There's a world of people who talk about self-care out there, and it's all valuable and worth paying attention to, and I do, but I will be honest with you, I'm not very good at self-care. I try, but I think that we all need to remind ourselves over and over again that like the battle is not won today. In fact, there isn't really a singular battle at all. And so if we spend everything that we've got right now, then we have nothing left for later. And that's a hard lesson, but an important one that we all need to continue to remind ourselves.
That was great. And my last tip, outsource.
Oh,
All
yeah.
my small business owners, you do not need to do everything. You can pay people to just do little things for you that you don't want to do. That's always my last piece of advice when we're talking about buying yourself time. Thank you so much, Jason. This has been awesome. I'm really excited for everyone to get the resources in the follow-up email. So I will send you that book link again. If you're on here live and you didn't get to fill it out, you'll get that in the follow-up email. You'll also get this recording, and I'll link to both of Jason's podcasts and his website for you. Jason, any closing words before we sign off?
Well, first of all, thank you, Emily. This has been, it's just been a wonderful conversation, and I appreciate how deeply you read the book. And I guess I'll get a little meta here, which is that, the most amazing thing to me about putting things out in the world is watching people react to them. And sometimes we maybe spend too long thinking about the things that we're putting out into the world, and maybe spend so long thinking about it that we never actually do it. And as a result, I think we really miss something. The greatest thing that you can do is to boldly put things out into the world, whether that's the service or your product that you make, or ideas that you have, because people will respond to them. And as a result, you'll start amazing conversations and you'll connect with people deeper than ever before. So Emily, I really appreciate you.
Thanks so much, Jason. And don't forget to get your copy. You're all going to want to be writing notes and reading it time and time again. So fill out that link that I send you. And thank you all for joining us live. Jason, it was awesome having you, and bye for now.
Thanks.